You're a disgrace to everything this family has built." Those were the last words my father spoke to me before I walked out of the penthouse overlooking Manhattan's financial district. Not goodbye, not good luck. Just that cold, final judgment that hung in the air like smoke from his Cuban cigars. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The mahogany conference table still bore the rings from crystal tumblers filled with 30-year-old scotch. The same table where 3 generations of Hartwell men had signed deals worth billions. Where handshake agreements moved markets. Where my grandfather had built an empire from nothing but ambition and ruthless determination. Now it separated us like a battlefield trench. And I was standing on the wrong side. My mother sat perfectly still in her Italian leather chair, her manicured fingers wrapped around a champagne flute she hadn't touched in 20 minutes. She wouldn't look at me, couldn't, maybe. Her silence cut deeper than any words could have. This was the woman who had taught me to tie my shoes, who had read me bedtime stories about brave knights and noble causes. Now she acted like I was a stranger who had wandered into their private sanctuary. My brother Marcus leaned back with that familiar smirk, the one he'd perfected during our Harvard Business School presentations. "I hope you realize what you're throwing away," he said, adjusting his platinum cufflinks. "The Singapore merger alone would have set you up for life. But I suppose playing sailor is more appealing than running a Fortune 500 company." The irony wasn't lost on me. These people who built their wealth on calculated risks, who gambled millions on market predictions, couldn't understand why I wanted to serve something larger than quarterly profit margins. They saw my decision to join the Navy as rebellion, as some kind of quarter-life crisis that therapy and time could cure. They didn't understand that I was suffocating in their world of private jets and charity galas, where every conversation was a performance and every relationship was a transaction. The rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows 40 stories above the street. Below us, millions of people moved through their lives without knowing or caring about the Hartwell name, without understanding that the decisions made in rooms like this one shaped their economic reality. That perspective terrified my family. To them, anonymity was death. "You think this is about honor," my father continued, his voice never rising above its boardroom pitch. "But honor doesn't pay for the education you received, the opportunities you've been given, the legacy you're supposed to carry forward. You're 28 years old, Rebecca. This fantasy of yours has gone on long enough." Rebecca Ann Hartwell. Even my name felt like a chain around my neck in that moment. 3 generations of expectations wrapped up in syllables I'd never chosen. My grandfather, Robert Hartwell, had built Hartwell Industries from a single textile mill in North Carolina. My father, Richard, had expanded it into real estate, technology, and international finance. Marcus was groomed from birth to take it global. And me? I was supposed to be the perfect daughter, the one who married well and looked elegant at corporate functions. But standing in that room, surrounded by oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors and awards for philanthropic contributions that were really just tax write-offs, I felt like I was drowning in inherited ambition. The Persian rugs beneath my feet had probably cost more than most people made in a year, yet they felt like quicksand pulling me down into a life I'd never wanted. "The Naval Academy called yesterday," my father said, pulling a letter from his inside jacket pocket. "Admiral Morrison personally assured me that there's still time to withdraw your application. He owes me that much after the donations I've made to their alumni foundation." The letter sat on the table between us like a loaded weapon. I could see my name typed on the envelope, could almost feel the weight of the decision pressing down on my chest. Everything I'd worked for over the past 2 years, the physical training, the mental preparation, the sleepless nights studying maritime law and naval history, reduced to a piece of paper my father could make disappear with a phone call. My mother finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Rebecca, darling, please think about what you're doing. The military is no place for someone like you. You've never wanted for anything, never had to struggle, you don't understand what that world is really like. Someone like me." The phrase echoed in my head as I looked around the room at the life they'd carefully constructed for me. Private schools where I'd learned to speak 3 languages but never learned to change a tire. Cotillion classes, where I'd mastered the waltz but never learned to throw a punch. Summer internships at art galleries and fashion magazines, preparing me for a life of refined uselessness. But they didn't know about the nights I'd spent at the local gym, learning to box from a retired Marine who didn't care about my last name. They didn't know about the community college courses I'd taken in mechanical engineering, paid for with money I'd earned working weekends at a marina, cleaning boat hulls and learning to navigate by the stars. They didn't know about the books I'd hidden in my bedroom, biographies of Grace Hopper and Heidi Lamar, women who'd changed the world through service and innovation. "You think I don't understand struggle?" I asked, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. "I've been struggling my entire life. Struggling to breathe in a world where my value is measured by how well I can smile and nod while men make decisions about my future. Struggling to find meaning in charity luncheons and board meetings where the biggest concern is whether the champagne is properly chilled." Marcus laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Spoken like someone who's never missed a meal or worried about paying rent. "You want to play poor, Rebecca? You want to pretend you're just like everyone else? Fine, but don't expect us to fund your little adventure in self-discovery." The threat was clear. Choose the Navy, and choose it without the safety net of family money, family connections, family forgiveness. Choose it knowing that I'd be starting from absolute zero, with nothing but my own determination to carry me through. I thought about my grandfather's study, where I'd spent countless hours as a child, reading his leather-bound books and listening to his stories about building something from nothing. He died when I was 15, but not before pulling me aside at his last Christmas and whispering something that had haunted me ever since. "Don't let them make you smaller than you are, little Admiral. The ocean is calling." He'd called me that since I was 7, when I'd announced that I wanted to captain a ship instead of marrying someone who owned one. Little Admiral. My family thought it was cute then, a childhood phase they'd indulge before reality set in. They never understood that it was a promise I'd made to myself, and to him. The rain was coming down harder now, turning the windows into rivers of distortion. The city below looked like a watercolor painting left in the rain, all the sharp edges bleeding together. I could stay here, in this climate-controlled tower, where the weather was just something that happened to other people. I could apologize, accept the internship at Goldman Sachs that my father had arranged, marry someone from our social circle, and spend my life managing charitable foundations and hosting dinner parties. Or I could walk out into that storm and find out who I really was when everything comfortable was stripped away. "I leave for Annapolis in 6 weeks," I said, my voice carrying across the room like a declaration of war. "With or without your blessing." The silence that followed felt like a held breath. My father's face remained impassive, but I could see the calculation behind his eyes. He was a man who'd built his fortune on reading people, on knowing when to fold and when to double down. This was him realizing that his daughter was no longer a variable he could control. My mother set down her champagne glass with trembling fingers. The sound of crystal touching mahogany seemed to echo forever in that vast room. When she finally looked at me, I saw something I'd never seen before in her eyes. Fear. Not disappointment, not anger, but genuine terror at the idea of losing me to a world she couldn't understand or influence. "Then you're no daughter of mine," my father said, his words falling like a judge's gavel. "The trust fund will be dissolved. Your credit cards will be canceled. Your apartment lease won't be renewed. If you want to throw your life away on some misguided notion of patriotism, you'll do it without a penny of Hartwell money." I nodded, feeling strangely calm as the last bridges burned behind me. "I understand." "Do you?" Marcus leaned forward, his eyes bright with something that might have been respect or might have been cruelty. "Do you really understand what you're walking away from? The connections, the opportunities, the security? You'll be just another face in a crowd of people who'd kill for the chances you're throwing away." I picked up my purse from the chair beside the window, the same chair where I'd sat as a child, watching the city sprawl out below while my parents hosted parties for people whose names appeared in financial magazines. The leather was soft and expensive, a gift from last Christmas that I'd never really appreciated until this moment, when it represented the last physical connection to a life I was leaving behind. "Maybe that's exactly what I need to be," I said, walking toward the elevator without looking back. Just another face in the crowd, earning my place instead of inheriting it. The elevator doors closed on my family's shocked silence, on the world I'd known for 28 years, on the girl who'd been shaped by expectations instead of ambitions. As the floors counted down toward street level, toward the storm waiting outside, I felt something I'd never experienced before in that building: absolute freedom. The doorman held an umbrella as I stepped onto Park Avenue, but I waved him off. The rain soaked through my designer dress within seconds, running down my face like tears. I was too numb to cry. Behind me, 40 stories up, the lights in my father's office went dark. I walked 12 blocks through the storm before I remembered that I had nowhere to go. The Hartwell estate in the Hamptons had always felt more like a museum than a home. Sprawling across 15 acres of perfectly manicured lawns, the Georgian mansion housed 4 generations of accumulated wealth and carefully curated memories. Every room told a story of success, from the library lined with first-edition classics that no one read, to the dining hall where senators and CEOs had sealed deals over 7-course meals. I grew up walking those marble halls like a ghost, my footsteps echoing off ceilings painted by artists whose names appeared in textbooks. The house staff knew me better than my own parents did. Maria, the head housekeeper, had bandaged my scraped knees and listened to my childhood dreams. Thomas, the groundskeeper, had taught me to identify birds by their songs, and shown me where the best climbing trees hid behind the formal gardens. But it was my grandfather's study where I truly came alive. Robert Hartwell had built his empire from nothing, starting with a single textile mill he'd purchased with a loan that terrified his young wife. The walls of his study were covered not with expensive art, but with maps of shipping routes, photographs of factories under construction, and handwritten letters from business partners around the world. His massive oak desk still held the brass compass he'd carried during his merchant marine days, before he'd discovered that his real talent lay in moving money instead of cargo. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. He died when I was 15, but not before sharing stories that my parents never wanted me to hear. Stories about sleeping in his car during the early days, about eating nothing but crackers and coffee for weeks while he reinvested every penny back into the business. About the night he'd stood on the deck of a freighter in the Pacific, watching the stars and promising himself that his children would never know hunger, never know uncertainty. But comfort can be its own kind of prison, little Admiral, he'd told me during one of our last conversations. Don't let them build walls so high around you that you forget what the real world looks like. My parents had different plans. They'd enrolled me at Miss Porter's school in Connecticut, where daughters of diplomats and oil executives learned proper etiquette alongside advanced calculus. The uniforms were pressed, the expectations were clear, and rebellion was managed through counseling sessions and carefully monitored study halls. I excelled academically because there was nothing else to do, but I felt like I was slowly suffocating under layers of tradition and propriety. Summers were spent at the family compound, where my days were structured around tennis lessons, violin practice, and French tutoring. My parents hosted elaborate parties, where I was expected to circulate among guests, making polite conversation with venture capitalists and foreign ministers, while servers in white gloves offered champagne I was too young to drink. I learned to smile on command, to ask the right questions about their businesses and vacations, to be charming without being memorable. But at night, when the guests had gone home and the house fell silent, I would sneak down to the marina. The Hartwell family owned 3 boats, a 60-foot yacht for entertaining clients, a smaller sailboat for weekend racing, and an old Boston whaler that no one paid attention to. I taught myself to navigate by the stars, using marine charts I'd stolen from my grandfather's study and a compass app on my phone. The water became my escape. Out there, beyond the sight of the estate's windows, I could drop the careful facade and just breathe. I learned to read weather patterns, to feel the subtle changes in wind direction that meant a storm was coming. I practiced knots until my fingers could tie them in complete darkness, imagining myself on the deck of a real ship, responsible for more than just looking pretty at dinner parties. My rebellion started small. Instead of the pre-approved summer internships at art galleries and fashion magazines, I convinced my parents to let me work at the local marina. They assumed it was a phase, a way to get some character-building experience before settling into my real role as a Hartwell daughter. They didn't know that I was using my paychecks to pay for classes at the community college, studying engineering and navigation, while they thought I was learning to appreciate fine art. The marina job changed everything. I worked alongside kids who'd grown up fixing engines with their fathers, who'd learned seamanship not from expensive sailing lessons but from generations of fishing families. They treated me like any other summer worker once they realized I wasn't afraid to get my hands dirty. By the end of that first summer, I could rebuild an outboard motor from scratch and dock a 40-foot sport fisher in winds that would terrify most weekend sailors. But the real turning point came during my junior year at Columbia, where I was studying international business because it was practical and appropriate for someone with my background. I was walking across campus when I saw them, a group of ROTC cadets running in formation, their voices carrying across the quad as they called out cadences. Something about their discipline, their sense of purpose, made me stop and watch. Later that day, I found myself in the Navy ROTC office, talking to a lieutenant commander who didn't seem impressed by my last name or my family's donations to the university. He asked me why I wanted to serve, and for the first time in years, I struggled to find words. How could I explain that I felt like I was drowning in privilege? That I wanted to earn something instead of inheriting it? That I needed to know who I was when stripped of everything that had been given to me? Most people join the Navy to escape something, he said, studying my application. Poverty, lack of opportunity, family problems. What are you trying to escape from, Miss Hartwell? I thought about the question for weeks. What was I escaping? Not hardship. I'd never known a day of real struggle. Not limitation. Every door in the world was open to me. I was escaping the suffocating weight of other people's expectations, the feeling that my entire life had been planned by committee, the knowledge that I would never know if I was capable of anything real. The moment I signed up for the ROTC program, everything changed. My parents were initially dismissive, assuming it was another phase like my brief interest in environmental activism or my semester studying abroad in Morocco. But as the weeks turned into months, and I began arriving home with calloused hands and military bearing, their amusement turned to concern. "This is ridiculous, Rebecca," my mother said during one particularly tense family dinner. "You're going to graduate summa cum laude from Columbia, and you want to waste that education playing soldier? Your father has already spoken to Goldman Sachs about a position in their international division." But I'd found something in those early morning PT sessions and weekend training exercises that I'd never experienced in boardrooms or charity galas, the satisfaction of pushing my body and mind beyond what I thought possible. When we ran 5 miles before dawn, when we learned to navigate using only a compass and map, when we practiced leadership scenarios that had no easy answers, I felt fully alive for the first time in my life. The final break came during Christmas break of my senior year. The family had gathered at the Hamptons house for their annual holiday party, an elaborate affair where Manhattan's financial elite mingled with politicians and foreign dignitaries. I'd been assigned my usual role: circulate among the guests, make charming conversation, and avoid saying anything that might embarrass the family name. But this time was different. As I moved through the crowd, listening to conversations about offshore accounts and political influence, I felt like an anthropologist studying an alien culture. These people wielded enormous power, shaped global markets with their decisions, yet they seemed completely disconnected from the consequences of their actions. They spoke about military conflicts like chess moves, about economic sanctions like weather patterns, abstract forces that affected other people in distant places. "Your daughter is quite accomplished," I overheard Senator Morrison telling my father near the fireplace. "Harvard Law would be lucky to have her. Though I understand she's been playing around with some military nonsense at Columbia." My father's laugh was carefully controlled. "A phase. She'll grow out of it once she realizes what the real world demands. Rebecca has always been spirited." Spirited, like I was a horse that needed breaking. Standing there in my black cocktail dress, holding a glass of champagne I didn't want, listening to my future being discussed like a business transaction, I realized that this would be my life. Decades of parties exactly like this one, where my value was measured by how well I could smile and stay silent while men decided the direction of the world. That night, after the guests had gone home and the staff had cleared away the crystal and silver, I sat in my grandfather's study and wrote my application to the Naval Academy. Not Columbia's ROTC program, but the real thing. 4 years of military training, followed by a commitment to serve my country instead of my trust fund. I mailed the application the next morning, walking to the post office myself instead of having one of the staff do it. The envelope felt heavier than it should have, weighted with the knowledge that I was posting my old life away along with the paperwork. By the time my parents found out what I'd done, it would be too late to stop it with phone calls and donations. The acceptance letter arrived 6 months later, hidden among the usual pile of correspondence that Maria sorted each morning. I found it before anyone else could, and for 20 minutes I sat in the kitchen reading and rereading the words that would change everything. Congratulations, Midshipman Hartwell. You have been accepted to the United States Naval Academy. I looked around the kitchen where I'd eaten breakfast every morning for 18 years, where Maria had taught me to make her grandmother's tamales, and where I'd done homework at the Marble Island while she prepared dinner for whatever important guests were coming that evening. The familiar space suddenly felt like a photograph, something from a life I was already remembering instead of living. The girl who had grown up in this house, who had learned to curtsy and speak French and play tennis on grass courts, was about to disappear forever. In her place would be someone new, someone who earned her rank instead of inheriting her position, someone who served something larger than quarterly profit reports. I folded the letter carefully and put it in my pocket, feeling its weight against my chest like a promise I was making to myself. In 6 weeks, I would trade the marble halls of the Hamptons for the disciplined corridors of Annapolis. I would trade designer dresses for naval uniforms, champagne receptions for mess hall meals, inherited expectations for earned respect. But first, I had to tell my family that their carefully planned future was about to collide with my deliberately chosen one. The bus from Baltimore to Annapolis carried 18 future midshipmen, and I was the only one not talking. While the others swapped stories about their high school wrestling championships and JROTC awards, I stared out the window at a landscape that grew more unfamiliar with each mile. These kids had dreamed of this day since childhood, had prepared for it with military precision. I felt like an imposter in designer jeans, carrying a leather duffel bag that probably cost more than some of their families made in a month. The Naval Academy gates appeared through the summer heat haze, like something from another century. Gothic buildings rose from perfectly maintained grounds, their stone facades weathered by decades of Atlantic storms and midshipmen's dreams. As our bus passed through the security checkpoint, I caught sight of the bronze statue of Tecumseh, the legendary figurehead that generations of midshipmen had touched for luck before exams. I wouldn't be touching it. I didn't deserve luck. I needed to earn everything that came next. Bancroft Hall stretched before us like a fortress, its corridors designed to break down civilians and rebuild them as naval officers. The processing station hummed with controlled chaos. Medical checks, uniform fittings, paperwork that would legally transform us from individuals into instruments of national defense. When they handed me my military ID card, the photo showed a girl I barely recognized. Hair pulled back severely, no makeup, eyes wide with something between terror and determination. Midshipman Hartwell, Rebecca A. The name felt foreign in my mouth when I repeated it back to the clerk. No more Miss Hartwell or Rebecca dear, just another number in a system that had been turning civilians into officers since 1845. My roommate was already unpacking when I arrived at our sparse room in the fourth wing. Jennifer Tank Morrison from Toledo, Ohio, earned her nickname by playing linebacker on her high school's football team, the only girl to make varsity in her school's history. She looked at my leather luggage with undisguised skepticism. "Let me guess," she said, not looking up from her regulation footlocker. "Your dad's a general, right? Or maybe an admiral who wants his princess to follow in his footsteps?" "My father owns a financial services company," I said, immediately regretting how that sounded. Tank snorted. "Rich girl playing sailor. This should be interesting." The first 24 hours stripped away everything I'd thought I knew about myself. They took our civilian clothes, our phones, our connection to the outside world. They buzzed our hair until we looked like pale eggs in white uniforms. They screamed at us for breathing wrong, for standing wrong, for existing wrong. Everything I'd learned about deportment and etiquette at Miss Porter's school became a liability when upperclassmen demanded that I sound off with military bearing. I can't hear you, Midshipman Hartwell. Are you whispering sweet nothings to your boyfriend back home? No, sir. I said good morning, sir. Sir. Good morning, good morning. There's nothing good about any morning that starts with your pathetic voice, midshipman. Drop and give me 20. Push-ups became my new language. 20 for speaking too softly, 20 for looking an upperclassman in the eye, 20 for not looking an upperclassman in the eye. My manicured hands, which had never done more than arrange flowers for charity events, split and bled against the gymnasium floor. The muscles in my arms, developed through tennis and riding lessons, screamed in protest as they adapted to real physical demands. But something miraculous happened during those first brutal weeks. I discovered I was stronger than anyone had ever expected me to be. When other plebes collapsed during morning PT runs, I found reserves of endurance I'd built during those secret pre-dawn workouts at the marina. When they tested our swimming abilities in the academy pool, I moved through the water with confidence earned during solitary midnight swims off the Hamptons coast. The academics were harder than anything I'd encountered at Columbia. Naval engineering courses that reduced calculus to basic arithmetic. Navigation classes where a single degree of error could theoretically sink a ship. Military history that focused not on dates and battles, but on the split-second decisions that determined victory or defeat. Every exam felt like a matter of life and death, because in 4 years, it would be. Tank and I developed an unlikely partnership. She helped me with the military protocols I'd never needed to learn, teaching me how to stand at attention without wobbling, how to address senior officers without sounding like I was asking for charity donations. In return, I helped her with the academic coursework that came naturally to me after years of elite education. You're not as useless as I thought, she admitted after I'd helped her through a particularly brutal thermodynamics problem set. Still can't believe you gave up being rich for this hell. I didn't give up being rich, I said, staring at the ceiling from my narrow rack. I gave up being nothing. The realization hit me during week 4, in the middle of a seamanship exercise that had us rigging sails on the Academy's training vessels. My hands, now calloused and competent, moved through the complex knots with muscle memory built through countless hours of practice. Around me, other midshipmen struggled with lines and tackle, but I moved with confidence that had nothing to do with inherited privilege and everything to do with earned skill. "Hartwell," Lieutenant Commander Stevens called from the quarterdeck, "take the helm. Let's see if all that yacht club experience translates to real seamanship." I felt every eye on the deck turn toward me. This was the moment when my background would either prove useful or reveal me as a fraud. I stepped behind the wheel, feeling the weight of the ship beneath my hands, the subtle pressure of wind and current that no classroom could teach. The harbor stretched ahead, dotted with other training vessels and commercial traffic that required constant awareness and adjustment. "Bring her about to starboard, midshipman. Let's see you thread that gap between the cargo ship and the buoy." The maneuver required precision and timing that I'd practiced hundreds of times in much smaller boats. I felt the ship respond to my commands. Felt the crew adjust sails and lines in coordination with my steering. For 20 minutes, I wasn't the rich girl playing sailor. I was the officer in command of 60 tons of steel and canvas moving through traffic that could crush us if I made a mistake. When we returned to dock, Stevens approached me with an expression I couldn't read. "Where did you learn to handle a ship like that, midshipman?" "Years of practice, sir. Small boats mostly." He nodded slowly. "Most of these kids think sailing means pointing the bow toward where they want to go and hoping for the best. You understand the water. That's not something you can teach." That night, lying in my rack while Tank snored in the bed across from me, I thought about the girl who'd walked out of her family's penthouse 6 weeks earlier. She'd been soft, uncertain, defined entirely by other people's expectations. The person taking her place was developing calluses on her hands and confidence in her spine. My muscles ached from the constant physical demands, but it was the sweet ache of growth, of becoming something new. The isolation from my old life felt complete and necessary. No phone calls from worried friends, no care packages from Maria, no family visits during parents' weekend. The silence from Manhattan felt like a form of death, but also like a birth. Without the constant pressure to be a perfect Hartwell daughter, I was discovering who Rebecca Anderson might become. The name change had been my first official act after leaving home. I'd legally dropped Hartwell and taken my grandmother's maiden name, Anderson. My mother's mother, who died when I was 5, had been a teacher in Minnesota before marrying into the Hartwell dynasty. It felt appropriate to honor the only woman in my family who'd worked for a living. By the end of plebe summer, I'd lost 15 pounds and gained muscle definition that would have horrified my mother. My hands were permanently stained with grease from engine maintenance classes. My hair, growing back from the initial buzz cut, stuck out at angles that no amount of styling gel could tame. I looked like someone who worked for a living, and I'd never felt more beautiful. The academic year brought new challenges. Advanced navigation courses where we learned to plot courses across thousands of miles of open ocean. Engineering classes where we studied the physics of nuclear propulsion. Leadership seminars where we analyzed famous military decisions and debated what we might have done differently. But the real education happened in the spaces between classes, in the conversations that shaped us as future officers. Late-night discussions about ethics and honor, about the weight of commanding others in life-or-death situations, about the difference between authority and leadership. My classmates came from military families, from small towns where joining the service was the highest honor, from immigrant families who saw military service as the ultimate expression of American gratitude. I was the only one who joined to escape something comfortable rather than to achieve something better. That distinction mattered in ways I was only beginning to understand. During Christmas leave, while my classmates went home to family celebrations and hometown parades, I stayed at the academy. The empty halls of Bancroft felt like a monastery, peaceful and purposeful. I spent the holiday volunteering at a homeless shelter in Annapolis, serving meals to people who reminded me that struggle came in forms I'd never imagined. One of the shelter regulars, a Vietnam veteran named Carl, who'd lost his job and apartment after a factory closure, asked me why I wasn't home with my family. "This is home now," I said, surprised by how true the words felt. He studied me with eyes that had seen too much. Running from something or running towards something? Both, I admitted. He nodded knowingly. Sometimes they're the same thing. The trick is figuring out which direction leads to who you're supposed to become. By spring, the academy felt like the only real place I'd ever lived. The brutal physical demands had become routine. The academic pressure had sharpened my mind into a precision instrument, and the military protocols had given me a framework for leadership I'd never experienced in civilian life. When Tank and I received our summer assignments, she to Marine Engineering School, me to surface warfare training, I realized that the girl who'd walked through those gates 10 months earlier was completely gone. In her place stood Midshipman Rebecca Anderson, 4th in her class academically, 1st in seamanship, and completely unknown to anyone who'd attended charity galas in Manhattan penthouses. The transformation was complete, irreversible, and exactly what I'd been hoping for without knowing it. But as I prepared for my first real assignment aboard a Navy destroyer, I had no idea that my old life was about to collide with my new one in ways that would test everything I'd learned about honor, loyalty, and the true meaning of service. The USS Portland cut through the Atlantic swells like a blade, her steel hull vibrating with the controlled power of twin turbine engines. Standing on the bridge at 0400 hours, watching the horizon blur between dark water and darker sky, I felt the weight of real responsibility for the first time in my life. This wasn't a training exercise or academy simulation. This was a guided missile destroyer carrying 300 souls through waters where American interests intersected with global tensions. My summer cruise assignment placed me under Commander Sarah Mitchell, a 20-year veteran whose reputation preceded her through every naval base on the East Coast. She'd commanded ships in the Persian Gulf, led anti-piracy operations off Somalia, and earned her stars through competence that had nothing to do with politics or connections. When she looked at me during that first morning briefing, I saw the same skepticism I'd encountered from Tank 9 months earlier. "Midshipman Anderson," she said, reviewing my file, "Naval Academy, top 5% of your class, exemplary seamanship scores. Tell me something that's not in this paperwork." "I legally changed my name before entering the academy, ma'am. I wanted to earn my place here without any advantages from my previous identity." She raised an eyebrow. "Previous identity? Sounds dramatic. Were you in witness protection?" No, ma'am, I was a Hartwell. The recognition flickered across her face immediately. Everyone in the defense community knew the Hartwell name, not just for their financial empire, but for their web of government contracts and political influence that stretched from Pentagon procurement to congressional defense committees. She closed my file and studied me with new interest. So you're running from something significant. The question is whether you're running towards something equally significant or just playing dress-up in someone else's uniform. Her words cut deeper than any physical challenge I'd faced at the academy. For the next 6 weeks, she tested me in ways that had nothing to do with navigation or seamanship. She assigned me to damage control teams during emergency drills, watching how I reacted when simulated fires and flooding threatened the ship. She rotated me through every department: engineering, weapons systems, communications, forcing me to understand how each piece contributed to the vessel's mission. But the real test came during our 3rd week at sea, when we received orders to rendezvous with a supply convoy carrying humanitarian aid to a disputed region in the Mediterranean. The mission briefing revealed details that made my stomach clench. The convoy was being escorted by private military contractors from Blackstone Defense Solutions, a company that had grown from a small security firm into a major player in international maritime protection. Blackstone was owned by Hartwell Industries. I sat in the briefing room listening to intelligence reports about piracy threats and regional instability, while PowerPoint slides displayed the corporate logos of companies providing security services. When the Hartwell Industries symbol appeared on the screen, the same stylized compass rose that had decorated my childhood bedroom, I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. The convoy includes 3 cargo vessels carrying medical supplies and construction equipment, the intelligence officer continued. Blackstone has provided 4 armed patrol boats and approximately 60 security personnel. Our mission is to provide naval escort and coordinate with their maritime protection teams. Commander Mitchell's eyes found mine across the briefing room. She knew exactly what this meant, what complications my family connection could create. After the other officers filed out, she approached me with an expression I couldn't read. "I assume this presents some challenges for you, midshipman." "Yes, ma'am, but my family's business interests don't affect my duty to this ship or this mission." "Don't they?" She pulled out a tablet and showed me an encrypted message that had arrived an hour earlier. "Priority communication from Admiral Carson's office. It seems someone with significant influence has requested that you be temporarily reassigned to shore duty for the duration of this operation." My hands clenched into fists. Even here, thousands of miles from Manhattan boardrooms, my father's reach could still manipulate my career. Someone had made calls, pulled strings, used connections to protect me from a situation that might embarrass the family name. "Ma'am, I respectfully request to remain with the ship for this mission." "I'm sure you do. But orders are orders. And this comes from high enough up the chain that questioning it would be unwise." That night I stood on the fantail watching our wake disappear into the darkness. In 12 hours, a helicopter would transfer me to a base in Spain, while Portland continued to the rendezvous point. My first real test as a naval officer, and I was being removed from the field like a chess piece that complicated the game. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent my entire life trying to escape my family's influence, only to discover that their power could follow me even into military service. Somewhere in a Pentagon office or congressional hearing room, someone had decided that Midshipman Anderson was too much of a security risk for a routine escort mission. But as I prepared to pack my sea bag, Tank found me in our shared berthing compartment. She'd been assigned to Portland's engineering department for her summer cruise, and 3 weeks of shipboard life had turned her into someone I barely recognized. Confident, competent, completely at home in the controlled chaos of naval operations. "Heard you're getting yanked off the ship," she said, settling onto the narrow bench beside my rack. "Family business," I said, trying to keep the bitterness out of my voice. "Bullshit. You think I don't know why they're pulling you? Your old man owns half the companies involved in this convoy operation. Someone's worried about conflicts of interest." I looked at her in surprise. "How did you?" "I'm not stupid, Rebecca. It took me about 2 weeks to figure out why a girl who talks like a boarding school textbook was slumming it with us peasants. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Before I could answer, Commander Mitchell appeared in the compartment doorway. "Anderson, with me, now." She led me to her quarters, a small cabin that served as both office and bedroom. The bulkheads were covered with charts and photographs from her various deployments, evidence of a career built through merit and dedication. She poured 2 cups of coffee from a battered pot and handed me one. "I've been thinking about your situation," she said, "and I've decided that orders can be interpreted creatively when circumstances warrant." I blinked. "Ma'am? You're scheduled for a helicopter transfer at 0800, but helicopters have mechanical problems sometimes, weather delays, radio malfunctions, things that might postpone your departure until after we complete the convoy escort. You're risking your career to keep me on this mission." "I'm not risking anything. I'm making a command decision based on operational needs. You're the best navigation officer this ship has, and you understand convoy operations better than anyone else in your class. If your family connections create complications, we'll deal with them when they arise." She leaned forward, her expression serious. "But I need to know that you're prepared for what might happen. If things go sideways out there, if we encounter hostile forces, or if the Blackstone contractors prove incompetent, you might find yourself in a position where your duty to this ship conflicts with your family's business interests." "There's no conflict, ma'am. I serve the Navy, not Hartwell Industries." Easy to say here in my cabin. Harder to live up to when you're watching millions of dollars in family assets burn because of decisions you helped make. The convoy rendezvous took place in international waters southwest of Cyprus, where the Mediterranean's deep blue gave way to the hazy horizon of contested airspace. Through binoculars, I watched the 3 cargo vessels approach our position. Massive container ships flying Liberian flags but clearly loaded with supplies destined for refugee camps in Syria. The Blackstone patrol boats moved with military precision around the convoy, their crews visible as armed figures in tactical gear. As we drew closer, I could make out the company logos on their hulls, the same design I'd seen on corporate presentations in my father's study. "Signal from the convoy Commodore," the communications officer reported. "They're requesting permission to come aboard for a coordination briefing." Commander Mitchell nodded. "Very well. Prepare to receive visitors." 20 minutes later, I stood in Portland's wardroom as the Blackstone team leader briefed us on threat assessments and security protocols. Captain Frank Rodriguez had spent 15 years in the Marines before joining the private sector, and his presentation revealed the kind of detailed intelligence that only came from significant corporate resources. "We've identified 3 potential threat vectors," he said, pointing to satellite imagery displayed on the briefing room screen. "Pirate activity from displaced Syrian forces, possible interdiction attempts by Iranian proxies, and the wild card of Turkish naval forces operating outside their declared territorial limits." As he spoke, I realized that the intelligence he was sharing came from sources far beyond normal contractor capabilities. This wasn't just private security. This was a shadow naval operation using corporate cover to project American influence in a region where official military presence would create diplomatic complications. "Questions?" Rodriguez asked, scanning the room. Commander Mitchell leaned forward. "Your intelligence sources seem remarkably comprehensive for a private security firm. Care to enlighten us about your information-gathering capabilities?" Rodriguez's smile was carefully neutral. "We maintain relationships with various regional partners who share our interest in maritime security." Regional partners like intelligence agencies, military contractors, defense ministries with close ties to American corporate interests? The silence that followed felt dangerous. I could see Rodriguez calculating how much he could reveal without compromising operational security, while Mitchell pushed for information that would help her understand what she was really escorting through these waters. "Let's just say that Blackstone has significant resources at our disposal," Rodriguez finally said. "Resources that benefit everyone involved in keeping these supply lines open." After the briefing, as the Blackstone team prepared to return to their vessels, Rodriguez approached me with an expression that suggested he knew exactly who I was. "Midshipman Anderson," he said quietly, "pleasure to meet you. Your family support has been instrumental in making operations like this possible." My throat tightened. "I'm here as a naval officer, not as a family representative." "Of course. But it's nice to know we have friends throughout the chain of command." That night, as the convoy began its transit toward the Syrian coast, I stood watch on the bridge, knowing that everything I'd worked for was about to be tested. Tomorrow would bring whatever threats lurked in these disputed waters, and I would have to choose between the uniform I'd earned and the legacy I'd tried to escape. But for the first time since leaving my family's penthouse, I knew exactly which choice I would make. The attack came at dawn, when the Mediterranean sky was still bleeding purple into gray, and most of the convoy was changing watch rotations. I was reviewing navigation charts in Portland's Combat Information Center when the first radar contact appeared. 3 fast-moving vessels approaching from the northeast, their speed and bearing suggesting hostile intent. General quarters, all hands man your battle stations," blared through the ship's communication system. The controlled chaos of a warship preparing for combat erupted around me as sailors ran to their assigned positions with practiced efficiency. Commander Mitchell appeared beside me, her eyes fixed on the tactical display. "Range and bearing?" 12 miles northeast, closing fast, speed 35 knots. 3 contacts, possibly rigid inflatable boats with mounted weapons. Signal the convoy to assume defensive formation. Blackstone patrol boats to intercept and identify. Through the bridge windows, I watched Captain Rodriguez's security team spring into action. Their patrol boats peeled away from the cargo ships with aggressive precision, forming a protective screen between the convoy and the approaching threats. But something felt wrong about their positioning. Too far forward, too exposed, as if they were more interested in engaging than protecting. "Sir," the communications officer called out, "we're receiving emergency traffic from Blackstone Lead. They're reporting engine problems and requesting immediate assistance." Mitchell frowned. "Engine problems? At exactly the wrong moment?" I studied the tactical display more carefully, noting the positions of all vessels involved. The approaching contacts had slowed their advance, maintaining distance, while Rodriguez's patrol boats struggled with their supposed mechanical failures. The timing was too convenient. The coordination too precise. "Commander," I said quietly, "I think we need to consider the possibility that this isn't a random pirate attack." She turned to me with sharp eyes. "Explain." "The attacking vessels aren't behaving like pirates, they're maintaining formation, staying just outside effective weapons range, waiting for something. And Blackstone's equipment failures are strategically convenient. They've created a gap in our defensive perimeter that forces us to move closer to the cargo ships." Before Mitchell could respond, the ship's radar operator called out new contacts. Additional vessels approaching from the southwest. 6 contacts this time, larger signatures, possibly patrol craft. The tactical picture was becoming clear, and it was terrifying. This wasn't a simple piracy attempt. It was a coordinated operation designed to force Portland into a specific position, surrounded by unknown contacts, while our private security escort was mysteriously disabled. "Sir, priority message from Fleet Command," the communications officer announced. "We're ordered to disengage and withdraw to international waters immediately." Mitchell's jaw tightened. "Disengage? We're escorting humanitarian supplies. We can't abandon the convoy." "Ma'am," I said, feeling pieces of a puzzle clicking into place, "what if we're not supposed to protect the convoy? What if we're supposed to witness its destruction?" The silence on the bridge was deafening. Around us, sailors continued their battle preparations, but the command staff had gone still as the implications sank in. If the convoy was attacked and destroyed, while American naval forces were present but powerless to intervene, it would create exactly the kind of international incident that could justify expanded military involvement in the region. "You're suggesting this is a false flag operation," Mitchell said quietly. "I'm suggesting that someone has orchestrated a scenario where American interests benefit regardless of the outcome. If we successfully defend the convoy, Blackstone demonstrates their effectiveness and secures future contracts. If the convoy is destroyed despite our presence, it creates justification for direct military intervention." The approaching vessels had arranged themselves in a perfect tactical formation, close enough to threaten the cargo ships, far enough to avoid immediate retaliation. It was textbook military planning, not the chaotic aggression of desperate pirates. "Commander," the tactical officer reported, "the lead cargo vessel is signaling distress. They're taking on water and requesting immediate evacuation assistance." Through the bridge windows, I could see the massive container ship listing to starboard, its deck already awash with seawater. But there was no visible damage, no signs of weapon impact or collision. The ship was sinking, but there was no obvious cause. Internal explosion, Mitchell muttered. Someone scuttled that ship from the inside. The pieces were falling into place with horrible clarity. The cargo ship wasn't carrying humanitarian supplies. It was carrying evidence. Documents, communications, financial records that could expose the web of corporate and military interests that my family had helped create. The attack was designed to destroy that evidence, while creating justification for expanded American involvement in regional conflicts. "Ma'am," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos erupting around us, "I need to tell you something about those cargo ships, about what they're really carrying." Mitchell turned to me with eyes that had seen too much betrayal to be surprised by one more revelation. "I'm listening. My family's company doesn't just provide security services. They broker arms deals, facilitate government contracts, create financial structures that allow American corporations to operate in regions where direct military involvement would be politically impossible. Those ships aren't carrying humanitarian aid. They're carrying evidence of violations of international weapons embargoes." The admission felt like stepping off a cliff, but there was no other choice. Everything I'd worked for, every bridge I'd burned with my family, every principle I'd claimed to embrace, was being tested at this moment. "How do you know this?" Mitchell asked. "Because I grew up in boardrooms where these deals were discussed like weather reports. Because I've seen the documents, heard the conversations, watched my father and his associates plan operations exactly like this one. The convoy was never supposed to reach its destination. It was supposed to be destroyed in a way that eliminated evidence while creating justification for expanded military contracts." Around us, the battle station's alert continued to blare, but the real war was happening in the space between duty and family loyalty, between the person I'd been raised to be and the officer I'd chosen to become. "Sir," the communications officer called out, "we're receiving direct communication from Admiral Carson's office. You're ordered to maintain your current position and observe only. Do not engage hostile forces." Mitchell stared at the message with growing understanding. "Observe only. Document the attack, but don't prevent it." The attacking vessels were moving closer now, their weapons visible even without binoculars. On the radar screen, I could see them arranging themselves for a coordinated assault that would leave no survivors to contradict the official narrative. "Commander," I said, "there's something else. Captain Rodriguez and his team, they're not just private contractors. They're former military intelligence, recruited specifically for operations like this. They're going to disappear those cargo ship crews before any attack begins." As if summoned by my words, Rodriguez's voice crackled through the radio. "Portland, this is Blackstone Lead. We're initiating emergency evacuation procedures for convoy personnel, requesting you maintain your current position and document all activities for post-incident analysis." Mitchell grabbed the radio handset. "Blackstone Lead, this is Portland Actual. You are directed to defend the convoy per your contract obligations." "Negative, Portland. We have operational priorities that supersede standard security protocols. Continue to observe and document." The euphemism was chilling in its clarity. Operational priorities meant eliminating witnesses. Document meant to create evidence for the predetermined narrative. Everything had been planned in advance, down to the radio communications that would justify American naval forces standing by while humanitarian workers died. "Ma'am," the weapons officer reported, "we have clear shots on the attacking vessels. Request permission to engage." Mitchell looked at me, then at the tactical display, then at the message from Fleet Command ordering her to observe only. In that moment, I saw the weight of command settle on her shoulders, the impossible choice between following orders and preventing a massacre. "Midshipman Anderson," she said quietly, "you've given me intelligence that suggests this entire operation is designed to eliminate evidence of illegal activities. Is there any way to verify that information?" I thought about the secure communication device hidden in my personal effects, the emergency contact protocols my father had insisted on before I left for the academy. He'd called it insurance, a way to reach family resources if I ever found myself in a situation beyond naval authority. Yes, ma'am. But using it would compromise my position permanently. Your position is already compromised. The question is whether you're willing to compromise it in service of truth or in service of a lie. The attacking vessels were almost within weapons range of the listing cargo ship. In minutes, they would begin their assault, and everything would be over. The evidence would be destroyed, the witnesses eliminated, and the official investigation would conclude that American naval forces had done everything possible to protect humanitarian workers from unpredictable regional violence. I pulled out the encrypted satellite phone my father had given me and activated the emergency protocol. Within seconds, I was connected to a voice I recognized, my brother Marcus, speaking from a secure facility that didn't officially exist. "Rebecca," he said, surprise evident even through the encryption, "we didn't expect to hear from you. Marcus, I need you to listen carefully. The convoy operation in the Mediterranean is about to go very wrong, and I need to know what's really in those cargo containers." The silence that followed lasted long enough for me to wonder if the connection had been lost. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice had changed completely. "You need to get off that ship, Rebecca, right now. Whatever you think you know, whatever you think you can do, it's bigger than you understand. Tell me what's in the containers." Financial records from Syrian reconstruction contracts, communications between defense contractors and regional militias, evidence that could bring down half the defense establishment if it reaches congressional investigators. The truth hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just about my family's business interests. It was about protecting an entire network of corporate and military officials who had turned humanitarian aid into personal profit. "Marcus," I said, watching the attacking vessels close the final distance to their targets, "I'm a naval officer now. I swore an oath. You're still a Hartwell. And Hartwells protect their own." I looked at Commander Mitchell, who had heard every word through the ship's intercom system. Her eyes reflected the same impossible choice I was facing: loyalty to family or loyalty to oath, personal safety or professional integrity. "No," I said into the phone, "I'm not a Hartwell anymore. I'm Lieutenant Anderson, and I'm about to do something that's going to destroy everything you've built." I ended the call and turned to Mitchell. "Commander, I formally request permission to transmit all intelligence regarding this operation to Fleet Command and Congressional Oversight Committees." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Permission granted. Send everything." As I began uploading encrypted files to secure naval communication networks, the first shots rang out across the Mediterranean. But this time, they weren't coming from the attacking vessels. They were coming from Portland's defensive systems, finally released to protect the people we'd sworn to serve. The battle for the convoy had begun, but the real war was just starting. The congressional hearing room fell silent as I finished reading my prepared statement. 2 months had passed since the Mediterranean incident, but the aftershocks were still reverberating through the highest levels of government. Senators who had built careers on defense industry relationships suddenly found themselves explaining how humanitarian aid contracts had been used to launder weapons sales. Corporate executives who had operated in shadows for decades were now testifying under oath about operations they'd assumed would never see daylight. I sat at the witness table in my dress blue uniform, every ribbon and insignia earned through merit rather than inheritance. The gallery behind me was packed with reporters, congressional staff, and family members of the cargo ship crew we'd saved. 3 committee members had tried to have me removed from the witness list, but Admiral Morrison himself had intervened, stating that my testimony was essential to understanding the full scope of this operation. Senator Patricia Williams, the committee chairwoman, leaned forward with an expression of barely contained anger. "Lieutenant Anderson, let me make sure I understand your testimony correctly. You're alleging that private military contractors, working with defense industry executives, orchestrated a false flag operation designed to eliminate evidence of illegal arms sales while creating justification for expanded military intervention in Syria?" "Yes, ma'am. That is correct." "And you came to this conclusion while serving aboard the USS Portland during what was supposed to be a routine escort mission?" The conclusion became unavoidable when tactical analysis revealed that the attacking forces were coordinating with our supposed defenders, and when intelligence communications confirmed that the cargo containers held documentary evidence rather than humanitarian supplies. Senator James Crawford, a longtime ally of defense contractors, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Lieutenant, Isn't it true that your family owns significant shares in the companies you're accusing of criminal activity? Doesn't that suggest your testimony might be motivated by personal rather than patriotic concerns? The question hung in the air like an accusation. This was the moment I'd been preparing for since the decision to upload those files 2 months ago. Every interview with naval investigators, every briefing with congressional staff, every sleepless night wondering if I'd destroyed my career for nothing, had led to this moment. Senator Crawford, I legally changed my name from Hartwell to Anderson before entering naval service specifically to avoid any appearance of personal interest in matters involving my family's business dealings. My testimony is based solely on evidence gathered during military operations and intelligence analysis conducted in accordance with my oath as a naval officer. But you stand to inherit millions of dollars from companies that could be destroyed by your accusations. Sir, I was disowned by my family before entering naval service. I have no inheritance, no financial interest, and no personal relationship with the individuals involved in these operations. My only interest is in ensuring that American military personnel are not used as unwitting participants in criminal conspiracies. Senator Williams consulted her notes. Lieutenant, can you explain how you gained access to the classified communications that form the basis of your allegations? This was the dangerous part. I had used family emergency protocols to contact my brother, technically violating security procedures even though the information obtained was crucial to preventing a massacre. Navy investigators had spent weeks determining whether my actions constituted appropriate intelligence gathering or unauthorized disclosure of classified information. Ma'am, during the incident, I utilized emergency communication channels to verify the nature of threats facing convoy personnel. The information obtained revealed that American citizens were in immediate danger from what appeared to be a coordinated attack designed to eliminate witnesses to illegal activities. And you made the decision to transmit this information to Fleet Command without authorization from your commanding officer? No, ma'am. Commander Mitchell authorized all transmissions after reviewing the intelligence I had gathered. The decision to engage hostile forces and protect the convoy was made by the commanding officer based on verified threats to American personnel. Senator Crawford leaned back with obvious frustration. Lieutenant, you're asking this committee to believe that career military officers and respected defense contractors conspired to murder American citizens in order to hide paperwork. Sir, I'm asking this committee to review the evidence and reach its own conclusions. The documentary materials recovered from the cargo vessels speak for themselves. Those documents had indeed spoken volumes. Financial records showing weapons sales to embargoed regions. Communication logs revealing coordination between private contractors and foreign militias. And payment authorizations that traced back to congressional appropriations committees. The FBI investigation had already resulted in 14 indictments, including 3 former Pentagon officials and the CEO of Blackstone Defense Solutions. But the most significant revelation had come from intercepted communications during the incident itself. When Portland's defensive systems had engaged the attacking vessels, they'd captured radio traffic that revealed the entire operation's coordination. The attacking pirates had been hired through the same shell companies that employed Blackstone's security teams. The mechanical failures that disabled the patrol boats had been triggered remotely. Even the cargo ship's emergency flooding had been caused by explosive charges planted during loading operations in Cyprus. Senator Williams called for a brief recess, and I stepped outside the hearing room into a corridor, buzzing with reporters and congressional staff. Admiral Morrison waited near the elevators, his expression unreadable behind 3 decades of command experience. "Walk with me, Lieutenant," he said, leading me away from the crowd. We took the elevator to a quiet floor used for classified briefings, where he could speak freely without worrying about recording devices or curious listeners. "You understand what you've started here," he said. "This isn't just about one incident or one company. You've exposed a network that's been operating for years, involving people with significant power and long memories." "Yes, sir, I understand the implications." "Do you? Because your naval career is about to become very complicated. There are people who will never forgive you for what you've revealed, and they have influence in places you haven't even considered." I thought about the anonymous phone calls I'd been receiving, the sudden cancellation of my shore leave requests, The way certain officers had started avoiding me in corridors. The Navy protected its own. But it also had to work with Congress, defense contractors, and political appointees who might view my testimony as betrayal rather than duty. Admiral, are you suggesting I should have remained silent? I'm telling you that doing the right thing and protecting your career are sometimes mutually exclusive propositions. The question is whether you can live with the consequences of your choice. Before I could respond, his aide appeared with an urgent message. Admiral Morrison read it quickly, then looked at me with something that might have been respected or might have been concerned. Lieutenant Anderson, you're to report to the Pentagon tomorrow morning. The Secretary of Defense wants to meet with you personally. The meeting took place in a secure conference room deep within the Pentagon, where the weight of American military power felt almost tangible in the reinforced walls and classified communication systems. Secretary of Defense Patricia Hayes had built her reputation on reform and accountability, earning respect from career military officers who'd grown tired of political appointees with no understanding of operational reality. She was smaller than I'd expected, but her presence filled the room as she reviewed my service record and incident reports. Two other officials flanked her, a deputy secretary I didn't recognize, and Admiral Morrison, who had insisted on attending despite not being directly involved in the investigation. Lieutenant Anderson, Secretary Hayes began. I've reviewed your testimony, your service record, and the intelligence reports from the Mediterranean incident. I've also spoken with Commander Mitchell, who speaks very highly of your performance under extremely difficult circumstances. Thank you, ma'am. I'm not congratulating you yet. What you did was either an act of extraordinary courage or an act of extraordinary insubordination, depending on your perspective. Some people in this building think you're a hero. Others think you're a traitor who used your family connections to expose legitimate intelligence operations. Ma'am, I acted according to my oath to support and defend the Constitution. Your oath. Tell me, Lieutenant, what do you think that oath means when it conflicts with operational security, when it threatens relationships with allied governments, when it exposes intelligence methods that took years to develop? The question went to the heart of everything I'd struggled with since that night on Portland's Bridge. Service meant following orders, but it also meant protecting innocent people. Loyalty meant supporting your chain of command, but it also meant refusing to participate in criminal activity. Ma'am, I believe the oath means that some principles are more important than operational convenience. If we allow humanitarian aid to be used as cover for illegal activities, if we permit American military forces to be used as unwitting participants in false flag operations, then we've betrayed everything the uniform represents. Secretary Hayes studied me for a long moment, then nodded to Admiral Morrison. Admiral, would you step outside for a moment? I need to speak with Lieutenant Anderson privately. After he left, she moved to the window overlooking the Pentagon's central courtyard, where construction workers were rebuilding sections damaged during recent renovations. Your family has significant political connections, she said without turning around. Your father has called 6 senators and 3 congressmen trying to have your testimony suppressed. Your brother has offered to provide alternative intelligence that would support a different narrative about what happened in the Mediterranean. I'm not responsible for my family's actions, ma'am. No, but you are responsible for yours. And your actions have created ripple effects that go far beyond one incident or one investigation. Defense contractors are scrambling to review their operational procedures. Congressional committees are demanding access to classified programs. Allied governments are questioning their intelligence sharing agreements. She turned to face me directly. The question is whether you're prepared to take responsibility for those consequences, or whether you're going to retreat back into the comfortable anonymity of routine naval service. I don't understand, ma'am. Lieutenant Anderson, effective immediately, you're being promoted to Lieutenant Commander and assigned to the Defense Department's Inspector General Office. Your new position will involve investigating allegations of contractor misconduct, reviewing defense industry compliance with federal regulations, and ensuring that military personnel are not used for unauthorized operations. The promotion hit me like a physical shock. In 2 months, I'd gone from a midshipman on summer cruise to a lieutenant commander, with responsibility for investigating the same kinds of operations that had nearly cost lives in the Mediterranean. Ma'am, I'm not sure I'm qualified for that level of responsibility. Qualification is earned through action, not through time in grade. You've already demonstrated the judgment and courage necessary for this position. The question is whether you're willing to accept it. I thought about the girl who'd walked out of her family's penthouse 2 years earlier, about the midshipman who'd struggled through plebe summer, about the officer who'd chosen duty over family loyalty. Each transformation had prepared me for this moment, for the opportunity to ensure that other service members would never face the impossible choices I'd encountered. Yes, ma'am, I accept. Secretary Hayes smiled for the first time since I'd entered the room. Then let's go change how this place does business, Commander Anderson. As we walked back toward the main conference room, I caught sight of my reflection in the polished marble walls. The woman looking back at me bore little resemblance to the uncertain girl who'd once counted her value in trust fund distributions and charity ball invitations. This was someone who'd earned her place through service, who'd chosen truth over comfort, who'd found her identity not in inherited privilege but in earned respect. The nameplate on my new office door would read, Commander Rebecca Anderson, Inspector General's Office, not because of family connections or political influence, but because when the moment came to choose between easy and right, I'd chosen right. And that choice had made all the difference. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you, right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.